Oh, what an interesting story this is. The back and forth, the back and forth. Jesus and this blind man, and the Pharisees, and the blind man's parents, and the Pharisees, and so on and so forth. And it just goes from one to another, trying to figure out what the heck just happened here. Here is this man that we thought was born blind. So either he wasn't blind and was faking it all these years, or he was blind and something miraculous or demonic has happened to him. And so the search begins. What happened? Trying to figure this out. I imagine this blind man had no idea that Jesus was about to come into his life and do this. That healing shook up his life. That healing changed everything. And it bothered people. It bothered people. What's going on here? What's happening to this man? How do we explain this? And that's what causes all of these questions. How do we explain this? How do we make sense of this? Because it doesn't fit into the neat little categories that we have in our mind. It doesn't fit into all of the rules and the regulations that we have in our mind. It just doesn't fit. So we go searching. Well, no. I don't think the Pharisees are searching. I don't think the Pharisees are looking for answers. Because just look at the questions that they are asking. They're not really trying to figure out what happened. They're trying to figure out a way to discredit what had happened. They're not looking for answers. They're looking for weaknesses in the argument. They're looking for ways to disprove this. They're looking for chinks in the armor. They're looking for ways to bring this man down. They're looking for ways to prove he is a liar. They're not looking for the truth. They've already made up their minds. And so their minds are closed. And this is why Jesus says they are blind. Because they aren't looking for the light. They aren't trying to understand. They're trying to move along their own agenda. And they're trying to advance that because that makes sense to them. That gives meaning to their lives. And if that all of a sudden has to change, then they don't know where they are. They don't know who they are. In the light of Jesus, we find ourselves revealed. This is who I am. And the Pharisees are afraid of who they might be. But there are some real questions here. What makes these questions, what makes these Pharisees question what's going on? Well, it's the same thing that made Jesus' disciples ask the question. Because as they're walking by, they see this man born blind. And so they turn to Jesus and ask him, now whose sin caused that? Was it the man? Or was it the parents? Because he was born blind. See, the Jewish mindset had this understanding that the effects of sin, the suffering, the torments, the sin that we have in the world, that's caused by people's sin. So if we suffer, if we are injured, if we are sick or diseased, if we are poor and begging, it must represent divine judgment. It must be a cause of sin. So to see someone who is sick and diseased meant they are a sinner. To see someone prosperous or wealthy or healthy or whatever meant that person was blessed. And Jesus immediately shatters that understanding and says, no, it wasn't their parents specifically who caused his blindness. It wasn't the man who specifically caused his blindness by their sins. Now the Jews were partially right, because it is sin that causes suffering, but they did not understand the communal nature of sin, that our sins affect one another. And so Jesus could have rightly turned to the disciples when they said, whose sin caused this blindness? He could have looked at them and said, your sin. Your sin caused his blindness. But he didn't. Jesus didn't come to ridicule or to cast down. He came to lift up. And so he turned and began working a healing. And he didn't just utter words. He bent down, he made clay, and he smeared it on his eyes and sent him off to wash. He did a work. He wanted to demonstrate to his disciples that in order to bring healing, in order to bring this reconciliation, we have to work at it. It doesn't just happen. It doesn't just magically appear. We work at undoing sin. We work at undoing suffering. We work at alleviating the poor's plight. We work at these things. And so Jesus worked at it, and he said to his disciples, we have to work. We have to do the Father's work while we are able to do that. This is our mission. And the Pharisees look at this, and now they don't know what to make of this. They don't know what to make of this, because this man born blind, who all of a sudden can see, how could this happen? We don't understand what has happened here. Is the man sinful? Is the man not sinful? We don't know. And so they turn their attack on Jesus. Who is he? How could he have done this? And again they begin judging him. Look at him. He's working on the Sabbath. It says you shall not work on the Sabbath. Therefore, he is a sinner. Therefore, we can discount him. So they go through their little bit of logic in order to build themselves up. Pharisees, in many ways, represent us. Because we often find ourselves in the world today blinded by our own sins and our own understandings. In order to survive in the world, we have to make sense of it. And so we figure things out. We figure people out. And we figure out how things and how people work. And that then allows us some comfort. But what it does is writes people off. Because when we're able to say, oh, this person did this, or this person did that, or that's a sin, or that's... How easy it is then to do what the Pharisees did and sweep it away. I don't have to deal with you until you convert. I don't have to deal with you until you change. It's not what Jesus did today. He was the agent of change. He was the agent of healing, not the blind man. He was. And he tells us that that's what we have to be. Rather than pigeonholing people, or judging them and putting them in their own little pockets so that we can write them off and make my own life mean more, Jesus challenges the Pharisees to come out of their blindness. He challenges us, rather, to express love, to do the work of love. You know, one of the comments that our Holy Father made several months ago that created quite a stir very much was what Jesus did today. When the Holy Father was specifically asked about marriage relationships and relationships between same-sex couples, what did he respond? Well, who am I to judge? He didn't take the bait. He didn't give the interviewers what they wanted. He didn't start a fight. Because he knew, I think, that that's what would have happened. And so rather, he said, you know what? This is about people. And people, we don't write off. Now, there are certain objective sins. We can identify sin. I know what a sin is. You and I know what a sin is. What we do not know and can never know is if someone is guilty for a sin. We can never know that. Because we don't know the circumstances in a person's life. We don't know how a person is blinded. We don't know how a person has been hurt. We don't know how a person has been taught something. We don't know what prevents someone from seeing the light fully. And we ourselves don't always see the light fully. And because of that, though we might commit sin, we may or may not be guilty of it. Only God knows that. And so we do not approach the sinner trying to convert him or her. We approach the sinner as Jesus did today, in love. Let me simply love you. Let me respond to you in love. Let me meet your needs. How many times do we make that approach and say, well, I would help them if they only demonstrated conversion. I would help them if they only changed their ways. I would help them if. And we set up the definition, the judgment. Jesus invites us not to judge, but rather simply to love. That's what changes hearts. That is a work, and it's hard work. It's hard to love someone in sin. It's hard to love something when it's not quite right. It's hard to love when we don't understand it. And that's why Jesus says, if you were blind, you would be free. We don't have to understand everything. We don't have to read people's hearts. We don't have to read people's minds. We can be blind about that, and we can simply love. Love the other. Love on the cross is what saves us. Love in our lives is what saves us. So our mission then is to go out and do what Jesus did. To bring light in the world for sure. To avoid sin ourselves for sure, so that it doesn't help or hurt others. And then to reach out in love and do the work of love. Let me do something to make your life better, to heal your life in its blindness. Let me act without judgment. The gospel ends kind of sadly for the Pharisees, who find themselves in blindness, as Jesus says to them. We want to see, and the only way that eyes are open is through works of love, not judgment.